Everybody, welcome back to another Carolina basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. This is portal season, and if David Sisk and I are doing a podcast at around 11 p.m. on any night, it means somebody committed, and that's the case here Sunday night. Jiren Stevenson, 6'11", listed by Rivals, 6'11" forward from Alabama, spent 2 years with the Crimson Tide, is transferring to UNC. He grew up right near UNC in Pittsburgh, went to Seaforth High School, spent a ton of time hanging out around Carolina, went to a lot of Carolina basketball games, ultimately chose to go play for the Crimson Tide, but he's back. And he's got 2 more years of eligibility before David dives in. And by the way, I am THI publisher Andrew Jones. He's our basketball. It's so late. I'm so flustered, David. Everything is spinning around.
We think that's who we are.
We think that's who we are. Longtime college, AAU, and high school coach, our recruiting analyst for the portal and high school, and also our basketball analyst, the one and only esteemed David Sisk. All right, David, very quickly, 5.4 points a game this past season, 3.4 rebounds, started 22 of 37 games for the Crimson Tide, 18.7 minutes, 43% from the field, 31% from three, 66% from the line, attempted 62 free throws. By the way, he attempted 101 threes, made 31, so he does shoot from outside, and a bunch of other numbers we'll get into in a few minutes. But your thoughts on a strange night, beginning with dead, and all of a sudden I get a phone call about Kanon catchings, and next thing you know, all hell broke loose.
So where do you want me to start? We got a lot of layers to this.
We got a lot of layers. Let's go Stevenson, and then we'll go a little backstory. How about that?
So I'll tell you about Stevenson just from watching him. I saw Alabama play live several times this year in Tuscaloosa and at the SEC tournament, and I think a lot of people know that I'm a Nate Oates fan of his style of ball, but it just worked out where I got to see him a couple of times. I don't live too far from – I can be in Tuscaloosa from where I live in about 3 hours. So Stevenson, you look at his numbers and you've got to remember the style of play that he was in. What Nate Oates does in Alabama and what Hubert Davis does in North Carolina is totally opposite. Really couldn't be much more diametrically opposed. So when he went there, you look at their system. If you look at his numbers his freshman season and you look at the numbers his sophomore season, they're almost identical.
Yeah.
You look at the averages, 5.3 points per game as a freshman, 5.4 points per game as a sophomore. But then when you peel back and look at the shooting numbers, 3-pointers as a freshman, 32 of 101. 3-point shooting numbers as a sophomore, 31 of 101. Total field goal numbers as a freshman, 66 for 158. Shooting numbers as sophomore season, 66 of 154. So they were almost identical, everything. So they played him a lot at the 3. If you remember when they came to North Carolina at Chapel Hill and played in December, he started that game, if I'm not mistaken, and he played the 3. And what made them very, very, and I didn't really know how big they were until that moment. So you've seen them live also. So they started him at the 3 at 6'11". They started Grant Nelson at the 4 at 6'11", and then they started Cliff Omarui at the 5 at 6'11". So they were 6'11" across the board. They had a 6'6" guard they started. They were a big lineup. What Jiren Stevenson brings you, and I think he's at his best when he played the 3, was that he was so good at guarding the perimeter. So when you've got a 6'11" 3 out there that can guard, your defense, if everybody else does what they're supposed to do, your defense can be off the charts. So that's the first thing I think of with him. Now, at North Carolina, do they play him at the 4? Well, he's still 6'11" if they play him at the 4. So you've got good size right there. But I'm telling you, if there's some ways that they can sneak him out to the 3 spot and let him defend, man, I just think it really makes you a better team defensively. It can really flip what you do. And that was the thing that really stuck out to me at him at his best. Now, the Alabama system, Nate Oates does not want the mid-range 2. They don't take them. It's either layups at the rim or it's 3-pointers. So if you look, he shot really well from 2 when he got to the rim. He was right at about 63%. But in 2 years, he took 202 3-pointers. He took 110 2-pointers. So he was taking 2-to-1 threes compared to 2s. But that was in the Alabama system. You either shoot threes or you get to the rim. When I look at him, I thought in high school his strength was to shoot that mid-range pull-up. I thought that was the best thing he had in his scoring arsenal, and he didn't get to do it at Alabama. So I think offensively, he could come into a fit at North Carolina, which in my opinion could be best for him. And now he can kind of go all 3 levels. He can make enough threes. So you're looking at a guy that's going to be, 31, 32, 33% shooter, which is not great. But I think his big thing is he can get into the mid-range and get into the 2-point shooting. And I really think that's going to improve him offensively to what he can do. He can still get to the rim. So I think the style, like we said, they're different. I think the offensive style at North Carolina, we'll see, but I think it may fit him better than what Nate Oates' style at Alabama did.
It's very interesting you say that because I was watching this film, waiting to do this show, and I've seen him play in person a couple of times. I saw him last year in Los Angeles in the Sweet 16, and then he's maybe why that they were able to beat Clemson and advance to the Final Four. He had a really good game in the regional final. But that mid-range stuff, when you watch a lot of his tape from Alabama, that mental clock that tells you, that demand that tells you to get to the rim, I think affected a lot of his shots, because almost like he was playing into contact when at 6'11" with his length, he could have gone up for an 8-footer, a 10-footer, and had it been uncontested, and if he shoots well from that range, get a lot of buckets. That instead he was either getting fouled, going to the line. He's a 66% free throw shooter, and suddenly the efficiency rate may have gone down at times because of that mandate to get to the rim. So what you're saying is the third level is he's shown he can hit some threes. And in that offense, a lot of them are forced. They force a lot of threes because it's the way they play. A lot of heavily contested 2s, but suddenly you open up the mid-range, and it should clean up a lot of those numbers.
Yeah, and if you look at I'm just looking at the roster when I look down here. I'm doing it on my phone. They had 4 posts outside of him. I mean, they had a big lineup. So they had Grant Nelson, Cliff Omarui, Darion Reed, and Aiden Sherrill, and Reed was about 3 inches smaller than Stevenson, but he played more of the 4 spot. So the 2 guys that were really kind of into the mix, to where you look at them and you think they may be more of the size and the body to play the 4, would be him and Mohamed Diabate. And they both played a lot of 3 spot. So Diabate, he didn't start any games, but he got about 16 minutes of play a game, which is about what Jarin did, playing the 3 spot as a bigger 3. So, and interestingly enough, Diabate transferred too. He's going to Kentucky. So they lost both of those guys. So they were, and I know this, doing some things with that site too, you're trying to figure out, well, where does Diabate play on that Kentucky roster? Well, what they brought in, he's going to play the 3, but he could slide down to the 4 and play it very effectively. Now, kind of what we're saying about Jarin. But Jarin, we think with the roster makeup that they have, it looks to me like he's going to get more time at the 4, but could play the 3 very effectively. So, yeah, I just think I just think the way Hubert Davis' offensive system sets up, it's going to allow him to get into that foul line area. He's not going to tell him, hey, here's the analytics. And the analytics say, don't shoot that pull-up jumper from the foul line. When Alabama played Duke in the Elite Eight, all I had to do was watch about 3 possessions of that game and say, Alabama's in trouble. They are in big trouble because Duke is going to run them off the 3-point line, and then they're going to funnel them right into Malawatch. And if Mark Sears had a horrible game, and the guards did, because when they got in there, they couldn't shoot over them. They're too small. They couldn't get over those guys. There was great rim protection. And I said, look, you're going to have to shoot the mid-range this game. And they might have ended up taking 3 or 4 mid-range jumpers in the second half, which is a lot for them. Yeah. But you had to do that, and that's just not in their style. So I think Stevenson can get back. I think he can get back offensively to a comfort zone.
I think Carolina fans should find the defensive stuff you said about him most intriguing.
Yeah.
Because one of the things Hubert started openly talking about once they hit the Duke game, the first one, was the length and how that length can guard in the perimeter, how that just doesn't let you run stuff. And that frustrated the hell out of Carolina all 3 times they played them, other than they had a run in the first game and that late run in the second game. And they didn't have Cooper Flagg or a third game rather. In the third game, they didn't have Cooper Flagg. And the players would talk about it. I mean, they would just say, and I'm not going to name names, like, man, that length. I mean, they would just say it, and you could see them just shrug their head, and that length, it took them out of everything they wanted to run. What you're saying they did to Alabama is exactly what they did to so many people. It's one thing to have length, but if you have length that can move, and Hubert loves to switch, and if you have big bodies that are capable of switching some, then that makes it even – I'm not a giant fan of switching all the time. I think if your guys don't need to switch, then don't switch, but I understand it, and that's what Duke did. And the switching drove Carolina crazy as well. I think Hubert looked up the road and said, we need some of that, and that's where we got to go. So I'm going to transition a little bit and talk Kanon catchings, because
Let me say this right quick.
Yeah.
Let me say this right quick, because we talked about playing the 4 and the length and all that. I think this team coming up, I don't know necessarily I can say it about the point, but if Drake Powell comes back and you have Trimble at the 2, you have Drake Powell at the 3, and you have Jiren Stevenson at the 4, those guys are going to be murder in the middle of that lineup defensively, because Powell brings you some of the same things. Trimble brings you some of the same things. And here we've talked about the rim protection and Jarin giving length and all that. Here's the thing about it. You can't mismatch him. The reason he was so effective at the 3, because he could guard SEC perimeters who are really good and athletic and just shut them down. They couldn't get by him. So he's got all that length hanging around. So that's the thing. So it's not like, okay, he's lengthy, they'll put him in the ball screen, then what? This guy can move his feet and defend. And so if they want to go 1-4 ball screen, or they want to ball screen a wing with him and they switch out or whatever, he's fine with that. Hubert Davis will be fine with that, because I'm telling you, he can guard the backcourt and perimeters.
Let me throw one other thing at you, too. I'm thinking while you're talking, and we're back to offense, obviously, but the high-low game that he could play with Vasar is awfully intriguing, David.
Yeah, and there's no high-low. There was no high-low at Alabama. There's a high. You might get some sweet and low. There's a lot of sweet tea in Alabama. You might
when Pete Nance
there's no high-low.
Hubert tried to play the high-low stuff with Pete Nance and Armando, but they just never really meshed. They didn't really connect that well. They were both a little too stiff in that sense. That is not the case with Vasar and Stevenson. They're far more agile than that pair was. Let's transition to Kanon catchings, because this is related. I got a phone call this evening.
We think it is. We think it is.
Well, I should qualify. We're doing this right now. It's 11:03 p.m. Sunday night, so there's going to be stuff that could come out. We think it's really just because of the irony of the timing, and obviously with the chatter that's been out there. I got a phone call from someone very, 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 very close to the situation this evening to say Carolina has moved on from Kanon Catchings. So I pressed for some other stuff, didn't get much. We went ahead and put it out there. It went crazy, got a story going. And of course, people are, so, well, it means Drake's back, or maybe they're going after Stevenson. Hubert screwed up again and all that kind of stuff. Catchings a year and a half ago was 6'6". Now he's 6'9". Stevenson 6'11". I mean, Hubert is clearly married to the idea of being a lot bigger. So your evaluation, since a lot of people are going to connect these two dots, very quick evaluation, Stevenson as opposed to Catchings.
Catchings, I would have to go back and look at his numbers, but you're probably more perimeter jumper oriented out there. Let me go back and look at that quick.
Long. He's got a lot of range, a lot of jumpers, but he's a guy that didn't play as much. And he was on a team that Stevenson's team beat the crap out of in the tournament, pulled away from. To me, there's a bit more of a consistency with Stevenson. And I say that because I think he had a role and understood his role. I think Catching's role kind of fluctuated. And he was banged up a little bit late in the season, which is why some of his minutes diminished. But I'm not saying Stevenson's better and better for Carolina. But I do think that if you're North Carolina and you've got to get a guy in that spot, is as much as you look at Catching and say, wow, there's some upside there. There still is for Stevenson too, obviously, but there's, more about Stevenson. You can watch his game. You played against him twice. You scouted him. You know more about him. You know what you're going to get. And they were burned last off season by thinking guys were going to be more than they were. They misevaluated a guy in the portal that everybody misevaluated, and then they brought a guy back, a big man they thought was going to be much, much better, and that's why they handled the portal somewhat the way they did. Here, I think that they're looking at this and saying, at least we know it's bird in the hand is better than two in the bush.
The numbers, when you look at them here, and I'm looking at Catching's number, I wanted to go back and look at that and see exactly what his three-point percentages was, because it's all these guys just to get mixed up to me. There's so many of them. Pretty similar points per game and all that, and the way he went about it. 185 shots last year, and 123 of them were threes.
Yeah.
So you're looking at right at 2-1 as well. So the type of shots that they took, very similar when you crunch the numbers, but he was 4% higher from three. So you can look at Catchings and say, well, he's a little bit more adept out there. But like we said,
I'm sorry to butt in real fast. I think he's got more range.
Yeah.
What I've seen, he's got more range. Catchings can stretch it out to 23, 24. I have not seen Stevenson do that. He's more within a foot of the line.
But does Hubert Davis want him to do that?
Yeah, that's true.
We're talking about the mid-range that he can go into. Hubert may not want that. Now, let me say this. I worked the phones tonight, texted a lot of people, called a lot of people, really wanted to kind of get in this tonight as the Catchings deal went more and more farther away from the visit, and there was no commitment.
Yeah.
So an individual that I speak with quite a bit, I wasn't going to be able to get much more out of him till Monday, but I know this. From the tone over the weekend compared to the tone, let's say Thursday, Friday going in, very different. At that time, it was all Catchings. There wasn't a lot of talk about Stevenson. It looked like that was going to be it. I don't know yet where this thing went south with Catchings. I know more tomorrow. Like you said, we're doing this less than an hour after Stevenson's commitment, and less than really an hour and a half after you found out that Catchings in North Carolina were no longer a thing. Because as soon as Catching that came out, the Stevenson announcement commitment came right behind it.
Yeah, it was 8:30 when I posted Catchings or tweeted it out, maybe about 8:25. And this happened at about 10:15. So hour and 45 minutes. Yeah.
So I don't know if something went south there. I don't know if all of a sudden they became more interested and got the feedback from Stevenson. I will, like I said, we will find out more. But I was told that Catchings and BYU, the coaches down toward the end may not have been the happiest marriage. And the individual that I spoke to, and I don't know this, I'll find out, but I'm just kind of passing along here. What I've heard, thought that maybe when the visit happened, and people may look at this and say, well, Hubert blew it or whatever, but they may not have been the most comfortable from the North Carolina side with what took place during the visit. I don't know that. I don't have anything to go on there, but this was passed along to me. And like I said, we'll find out during the week. But they knew what they were getting with Stevenson. They'd recruited him before. So I think with Stevenson there, it might have made it easier for Hubert to say, we're not going to take a chance here. So keep that in mind. And like I said, we'll find out more from as we get into the week. But getting back to the play, like I said, just because Catchings is shooting better and deeper from the three-point range, like I said, that may not be what Hubert wants. He may want that more traditional four, and he may want somebody who's a stronger defender. I promise you this, I've not watched Catchings defend a ton, just watching him, but I watched BYU defend, and I would think that Stevenson's going to bring you a lot more on the defensive end. And like I said, I think bring you more of a traditional four, though, but who may be more athletic than the big burly fours that you remember in the past, but can still do some of those same things.
Yeah, if you watch BYU play defense, you think they've taken some tutorials from Paul Westhead or something like that. So from back in those days, if you remember that. And by the way, I covered a Paul Westhead game when he was at George Mason, believe it or not. That's how long I've been doing this crap.
I watched BYU. Let me look at this. I watched BYU play Alabama. Don't forget this. That NCAA game when BYU played Alabama, and Alabama won 113-88. Don't forget that Alabama broke every kind of record in the book in that game. And they made, if my phone will move here,
they made 26
Alabama made 25 threes. 25. They shot 51. They went 25 for 51. So in that game, Stevenson played 15 minutes. He didn't get in on the three-point barrage. He only shot 2. But just going back and watching BYU, Catchings only played 5 minutes that game and scored 2 points. Stevenson played 15 minutes and scored 2 points. So neither one of them set the woods on fire. But when I watched that game and I watched BYU defend, they went under every screen against Alabama. That was their game plan. And that's why they shot 51 threes, because BYU kept going under screens. They never adjusted, which is one of the most insane strategies I've ever seen. And so if we look at the defensive end of it, now BYU's a very good offensive philosophy. Very exciting, fun to watch. But, man, I don't know that you're going to find many defensive players generating out of that system.
Before we close this out, Stevenson played 31 minutes against Carolina the last 2 years. He was 2 for 3 from the perimeter in the game in Chapel Hill this year. So he has a high shooting percentage in the Dean Dome. So people should take that to heart, right?
And let me say this too. Alabama's system is not one where they're equal touches. Mark Sears was a very, very ball-dominant guard. And there's a lot of ball screen actions for Alabama. There's a lot of attacking downhill, and then you drive and kick if the defense collapses. Sears was had that ball in his hands a lot. Sometimes he'd dribble air out of it. So they did. I put it this way. He had the ball in his hands a lot more than R.J. Davis ever had it in his hands at North Carolina. So Stevenson was used a lot to screen. Same way Diabate was used. They were used as specialists. So, yeah, they got off 100 threes for a year, but you got to think they played 37 games. So, that doesn't even come up to 3 a game.
Well, you have to pick it.
They were kind of specialists. You defend, you rebound, you crash the glass, you set screens. That's what they wanted. So that's kind of what they looked for out of their 3. If they had enough with their bigs throwing lobs on a roll and then putting shooters out around them, Grant Nelson could really shoot it at the 4, so could really score. So when you had the guards who could shoot like they did, and then you had Grant Nelson at the 4, he was just there, their 3 spot. They didn't really need a lot of scoring there. So kind of keep that in mind too, that wasn't his role. It wasn't like you look and you say, well, he's scoring 6 or 7 points a game. He shot 18 times and scored 7 points. That wasn't it. He shot 63% from 2. He was pretty efficient, but it was the way he was used in the system.
Yeah. People want to ask opinion. They want opinions and thoughts about how would you grade this pickup? How would you grade this portal class? And I've maintained all along, we're not going to know until late January next year. Mm-hmm. But there's some intriguing parts they brought in, and this is a very intriguing one. I also think there's some safety to it because they kind of know what they're going to get. Hubert got a lot of surprises this year. Whatever he sat down at the kitchen table and drew up on his napkin in August or July, 2/3 of that stuff didn't come true. It wasn't what they were. I think being caught by surprise was something he didn't handle real well this year. And I don't think they want that. I think they know what they're going to get from him. I think they have an idea what the baseline is for Vesar. I think they know what the baseline is for Powell, who, by the way, is a pretty good defender at 6'6", 6'7" as well. And also with Evans from Colorado State. I think that they have a good idea of what the baseline is for all 4 of those guys. And they see upside with all 4 of them, and meshing that with whoever comes back. They believe that they're going to have maybe not the wow players, but a lot of pretty good players that they'll be able to run in and out and handle different styles of play. They can go fast. They can play big. And they weren't able to play big this year. Defensively, it cost them a lot more than offensively. But offensively, it screwed them up so much, it took Hubert 3.5 months to figure out what the lineup should be. So that way this year, I don't think that will happen. Or this coming season, I don't think that will happen. I think he'll know that group better in October than he knew this group.
And Hubert's got an advantage of knowing, because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think now Nate Oates probably knew, but you got to remember in Alabama with that system that they have, the fans think everybody that comes in there, every recruit's going to be second coming to Steph Curry. And so that's not the case. So I do where I live. Like I said, I know I've got a lot of friends in the media in Alabama, especially on radio. So I'll do radio shows every week in Alabama. And so when he committed, I'll never forget it. It was in the summer. I was driving in the morning. I was going to play golf. So I get a text and say, hey, can you pull over and talk? They've just got a commit from Jiren Stevenson. You know a little bit about him. He's in North Carolina. Can you just kind of share? And it was a station I don't think I've ever spoken about a recruit before, but I covered him a lot, in his original recruitment. So and I told them, I thought it was a mistake to go there because I just didn't think he fit into what they did. And I told them, and they said, well, tell us 3-point shooter, all this. And I'm like, and he was still young, too. There was the reclass and everything. And I told him, I said, look, you guys are talking like, he's going to come in. You're looking for a 30-point-a-night score. He's not going to be that, especially if he's going to have to, if 70% of his shots are going to come from 3. He's not going to be that kind of guy. So Oates knew probably what he had. But I just think in that whole system now, when you've got 2 years under the belt in college, and I think Hubert can look at this and say pretty well with certainty, we've seen what Jiren Stevenson has done in 2 years. But now I think in his system, we can look and see what he can do with what we want him to do. And let me say, give me one more example. I don't mean to drag on here.
No, it's all right. I drag all the time.
But a guy I really missed the boat on was Grant Williams, who's from Charlotte. And I remember watching him with CP3 and AAU, and Tennessee had signed him. And I'm like, man, Rick Barnes is a wonderful coach, but I don't get it. He's overweight. He just basically stands over there in the corner. And if I kick it to him, he shoots a three. And, man, I don't see it. And you see what he turned out to be at Tennessee and then had a run with the Celtics. So I saw Rick Barnes years later at an AAU event, an EYBL event. And I said, Coach, let me ask you a question. I've been wanting to ask you this. I'm just fascinated with this. What did you see in Grant Williams? Because I never saw it. And you're a lot smarter than I am. I want to learn. And he said, we didn't look at Grant Williams the way he was when you were watching him. We looked at him down the road and said, hey, what if we got 30 pounds off his? He said, I tried to visualize him 30 pounds lighter of what he could be. And he said he turned out to be what I thought he was. So Jiren Stevenson doesn't have to drop 30 pounds or change his body or do anything. But in a system that might be more friendly to what he does, I think we need to maybe visualize what he could be in that rather than offensively what he did at Alabama.
I'm going to leave you with this. If there are no other changes up front, as of this moment, North Carolina's got up front 7 feet, 6'11", 6'10", 6'10", 6'9", and 6'8" with a 7'4" wingspan. So they're not small anymore.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think I was really impressed toward the end of the year with Van Allen Lubin. I mean, I really was, because against some stronger competition, he had some games. If it's not for him, they don't get in the tournament. Because he had some games where he just overpowered inside, but he plays under the rim. He's that big bully 4 type, really. And there's no rim protection. So when you don't have the right pieces around him, it kind of is what it is. But I think we look at all these new guys and we forget, man, there was a guy right there who was scoring double digits almost every game down the stretch and getting rebounds. And, man, he was moving furniture inside.
Very, very efficient.
I like him, man. So now you get the size around him. And you think, okay, if you do that, how much more effective can he become? Because you're not asking him to do things that he can't do. He can play his game now. I'd hear, living in Tennessee, I'd have all these Vanderbilt fans ask me, said, they're not playing him at a 5, are they? They're going to play him at a 5? Well, it turned out they had to. So I just think he's more, at that 4. So even when you do that, you've got him there. You're not asking Jiren Stevenson in this, hey, we've got to have you come in and score 15 a night or 20 a night. You don't need that now. And you made a great point, because you've got offense in there with Lubin. And now you've got other, the big coming in out of Arizona. When you look at the stuff on him, the thought was he was going to end up being all Big 12 maybe next year, that he was getting ready to take off. So you've got guys like that. I think you've got bigs who can do different things. And now you go back to the Dean Smith model. Last year they barely had 2 posts, to be honest with you. What Dean always say, he wanted 4. I want to be 2 deep at each spot. Look at Florida. I've said this all year long. Florida took the Dean Smith model and wore teams down. You've got fouls to give. You can defend. You can bang on people. And look how many times Florida was behind at an NCAA tournament, and they never sweat it. They just wore teams down, They wore Auburn down big time. Broome was fighting all those guys off by himself. They just kept rotating. 2 in, 2 out, 2 in. And now North Carolina can do that and go back to like a traditional lineup that we used to see from DeMaestro for years.
I agree with you 100%. The question will be, how does Hubert see it? I think that if the vision of what he's bringing in leads us to believe anything, I think that there's more changes than just being longer that he's going to incorporate it into this team.
The one thing that I see that worries me, I don't think people realize how much they're going to miss R.J. Davis, because R.J. They've got to get somebody in on the perimeter that's going to be able to score.
They got to have a wild player. They got to have that guy to get you that bucket. And right now they don't have it. Yeah,
and I just think, times over the years, and I know people last year, RJ may not have had the full year like some people wanted him to have, man, but I'm going to tell you what, there toward the end, he got going, and it just carried the team. And when RJ was making shots, everybody else was free-flowing, but they depended on him to make buckets, and they've done it for a while. So you lose that, and now you look up and say, who's that guy? That's my concern. Yeah. They need do they have that? They need somebody. If they don't have it, they need it.
I think they need to get one more guy in the portal. And by the way,
they just don't need to get another perimeter player. They need to get a guy, put the ball in the bucket.
Put the ball in the basket. RJ, I thought, had a really good year this year. And after, January 8th or something like that, he shot higher percentage than he did last year from three the rest of the season. He didn't have that screener. It took him 2 months to figure out how to play without a guy screening for him.
Without Baycott, Baycott shielded him. Baycott really shielded him.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. That's a big Baycott's that's part of my ACC player of the year too, because he got him some of these shots. Armando openly spoke about it, and RJ's like, who's going to get through him? If he's screening, I got a wide open shot, even though he's 3 feet in front of me. So they do need to find a score. There are scores out there. It'll be interesting to see what else they do. I think that Hubert needs to go for broke and get a scorer, because he needs to for job security. That's something we'll discuss this offseason, obviously. But right now, let's go ahead and close this thing up. Jacob's got to edit this thing and then get to bed. He's David. I'm AJ. Jiren Stevenson is the newest Tar Heel through the portal. That makes 4 so far. I still think they're going to bring in one more, David, and we'll discuss that as the week goes on. We will always have our eyes and ears to everything, and you can have access to premium information at TarHeelIllustrated.com. Just $8.33 a month for a 1-year subscription. The stuff we've been running out there on this portal has been outstanding. David is the best in the business, so appreciate it. For Dave, I'm AJ. Thanks for stopping by.